On today's show, who is the best option for first-line center for the Capitals, Dubois or Strome? I'll discuss next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about who is the best option for first line center. Listen, last season we saw good results by Dylan Strome, but another player that took a big step forward is Pierre-Luc Dubois at the second line center position. Is there the possibility that Pierre-Luc Dubois could be the first line center? We'll talk about that. And then the big question is, ultimately, who is more qualified, Strome or Dubois? And let the analytics, let the statistics speak for themselves. So let's dive right into it. First, talking about Dylan Strome, and well, wow, what a season he had last season. And if you think back, it was a bit of a turnstile at that first line center position a couple seasons ago in the vacuum when Nicholas Backstrom stepped away from hockey and then went on the LTIR, that there was a real question that, Backstrom and Ovechkin had a great chemistry for years. Backstrom assisted on more Alex Ovechkin goals than anyone else. Who is up for the task of centering a line with the Great Eight? And as it turns out, Dylan Strome was the guy last season. And what did we see from him last season? 82 games, 29 goals, 53 assists. That's 82 points. And if you're doing math at home, that is a point per game season. And that's quite impressive for a guy that was put on the scrap heap by the Chicago Blackhawks. And that wasn't just good for last season. That was a career high. And it wasn't just about the raw point totals. When Strome was on the ice 5-on-5, the Caps controlled the scoring. He posted a goals for percentage of about 52%. And those are the key markers that we're looking for. So when he was out there, the Caps scored more than they gave up. That's a good sign for a first line center. Now, here's another thing that, really popped off the page. And these are the important things that you need to kind of really drill down on when you're making a decision about who is the most qualified person, is that Strome started over 77 of his shifts in the offensive zone. So the coaching staff clearly trusts him in those big offensive moments. And I guess you could say one of the things that's against him, if we're weighing pros and cons, is he's not the fastest guy out on the ice, right? That he is not going to be the guy that's finishing his checks. He's not the guy that's going to play with a physical flair. And that's what I'm saying. He's not going to wow you with that physical play. But that's not a part of his skill set. We know that he's a finesse guy. We know that he's a guy that slows down the play and controls the pace. But what really makes him work, especially with Ovi, is that hockey IQ. Something that's not easily quantifiable, but something that spoke more and more of in modern hockey. And one of the things, like I talked about there, is slowing down the play. That when there's a lot of chaos, he will slow down and he will dictate the pace of play. He knows where to be, and he ultimately knows how to set up Alex Ovechkin. And what makes both of those players work so well together is they're both not the fleetest of foot, shall we say. That Strome's not the quickest skater on the ice, neither is Alex Ovechkin, and I think that complements, they complement one another quite well in that regard. Now, that's the big thing. He's smart, he's patient, and he's got chemistry. And I think that is one of the biggest things that Dylan Strome has going for him, because you look back a couple seasons ago, when it was breakdown day, Alex Ovechkin talked about the players that cycled through that he played with at the center position. And he alluded to the fact that maybe that is why he got off to his slow start a couple seasons ago. And that it definitely feels like he has that chemistry with Dylan Strome. So that is huge. And it's also about, playing in big moments. If you remember late last season against the Islanders, Strome put up that hat trick coming in clutch in key moments when there was a lot at stake for the Capitals. He scored in all 3 periods. That's a guy who can finish too, not just pass. He's not just a one-trick pony. Sometimes centers, their job is to dish it to the wingers, but he is a guy that can take control and find the back of the net as well. So with Dylan Strome, you know what you're getting. Reliable offense, good decision-making, a player Ovechkin clearly trusts. That's a big check in his favor. And I think one of the greatest assets that he has in his skill set is knowing exactly where to be. And like I say, it's a good thing that the Capitals had someone like that, because I think when the Caps went out initially and acquired Dylan Strome, I don't think that they thought to themselves, hey, we're going to get the guy on the team right now that is going to pick up the torch when Alex Ovechkin hangs up the skate at some point. It just turns out that that is the case. And the things that really stand out, again, that hockey IQ, being in the right place, knowing how to set up Alex Ovechkin, and, has some comparables to Nick Backstrom, I guess. I think that, Nick Backstrom was, in my opinion, and statistically, if we're going to look at it big picture, a better center, and who knows where Strome will end up being. But it's good that they had someone internally to pick up that torch and really helped elevate the Capitals to the next level. Because you take a look at it, that first line center position is entrusted in some big situations, and you are playing on a line with the greatest goal scorer of all time, that you really need to work with these players. And, the good thing about Spencer Carberry is he is the guy that knows the players so well. He's not afraid of mixing things up. So, what we saw last year is it was primarily Strome playing on that first line with Alex Ovechkin. Not to say that Spencer Carberry might not tinker with some things in the preseason, or say for some reason they don't get the results that they're looking for to start the season, that you might, see Spencer Carberry try to, move a player here and a player there. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about another player that could get a look at that first line center position. He did an excellent job at the second line center position. Pierre-Luc Dubois, would he be a good fit, or does he deserve a look? I'll discuss next. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to Sundays. So, if you're watching the Ravens, if you're watching the Commanders, you know that you're already into the games. But if you want vested interest in all of the games, put a little bit of money on the game. It makes all of those games that much more exciting. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in segment 2 here, we're talking about the man himself, Pierre-Luc Dubois. And if we rewind time a little bit and remember how Pierre-Luc Dubois arrived in Washington in the first place, is the Capitals had Darcy Kemper, a bit of a square peg in a round hole, a guy that the Capitals had a big feeling was going to be the answer in net. Well, as it turns out, he wasn't the answer in net. And you take a look at the Kings, they had Pierre-Luc Dubois, a bit of a mismatch. underutilized, misutilized, and was just not a good fit for the City of Angels. So what happened? Well, Brian McClellan and the Kings GM orchestrated a trade, and it seems like it was a win-win scenario. The Kings got a good netminder, the Capitals got a good second line center, and taking a look at Pierre-Luc Dubois, took big steps forward last season. This is a guy that people said was a cancer in the locker room, only played when he wanted to play. Are we going to see the Pierre-Luc Dubois that we saw in Winnipeg or in Columbus, or even a worst case scenario, were we going to see the Pierre-Luc Dubois that played for the Kings? And oftentimes it's about a change of zip code, a change of scenery, and it's not really too explainable other than to say it didn't work under those systems. And I think that's a thing to kind of underline here, is that Pierre-Luc Dubois did not mesh with the systems with the Kings. You got a guy like Spencer Carberry, the head coach of the Capitals, that has a rapport with the players, is not dug into any mindset or ideology, that he's willing to meet the players where they are and utilize them in the best way possible. And what happened? The confidence was put into Pierre-Luc Dubois, and surprise, surprise, he delivered. He elevated the play of Connor McMichael. He elevated the play of Alexei Protas or Tom Wilson, depending on who was playing on that second line right wing with him. So I think a good fit. So the question is, and I'll talk about that a bit more in the third segment, would he be a good option at the first line center? Well, let's talk about his season in review and kind of weigh out the pros and cons of Pierre-Luc Dubois. A newer-ish guy to the team, right? He has one season under his belt with the Capitals. To contrast the difference between him and Dylan Strome, we talked about Dylan Strome, a smaller guy, not a physical player. On the other end of the spectrum, he is a powerful center who came here with a lot of buzz. And when I say a lot different, 6'3", 218 pounds. And he's locked in for a long game here. He signed that original deal with the Kings, 8 years, $68 million. That's $8.5 million cap hit. So I think it's safe to say that he's not going anywhere. And as Capitals fans, if he can deliver the way that he did last season, we don't want him going anywhere. So that's a big thing for the Capitals going forward, is having stability, at least penciled in at that second line center position. In a league of what have you done for me lately, if we want to just talk about the numbers, because that is what should be of paramount importance, is the numbers and the statistics, while also putting weight into things that aren't easily quantifiable, talking about chemistry, trajectory, those kind of things. But let's deal with numbers first, as I think that is the most important. He put up 66 points, 20 goals, 46 assists, solid numbers. I think that is a thing to say, that it was a bounce back season for him, and I think is what had him playing with some confidence. But if you want to take a look at the advanced stats, Dubois was excellent. His goals for percentage was 62%. That's pretty good. When he's on the ice, the Caps are dominating the scoreboard, and his possession numbers are strong. If we want to take a look a little bit closer at his advanced analytics, 52% Corsi 4, positive relative numbers as well. And here's the kicker. His points per game, 60 minutes, was 2.42. That's higher than Strome's 2.14. So just taking a look at the numbers alone. So on a per minute basis, he was actually producing more offense. And Dubois can be a force physically. I think that could help clear the lane for Alex Ovechkin to go out there and score more goals. Dubois to score more goals in his own right, but I think if you're playing the first line center, I think you understand the assignment, that it's important to feed the puck to, well, the greatest goal scorer of all time. But the thing that I like about PLD is he drives the net, he protects the pucks. When he's on his game, he is a matchup nightmare for the opposing teams. And you saw true flashes of greatness from him and throughout the season. Big picture, he was great. And, you remember that game against Vancouver. He scored both goals, including the OT winner. That's the kind of player he can be. So that is the positive side, but it's not all positive. It's not usually all positive for every player. The downside is his consistency. Sometimes he disappears. Sometimes he's not engaged. And then, well, the biggest thing that is the biggest deterrent or detrimental for Pierre-Luc Dubois is the penalties. 76 penalty minutes last year. That's too many minutes. And I know that oftentimes he lets his emotions get the best of him. And that is definitely not going to fly if you're playing first line center with the grade H. You need a guy out there that's going to feed the puck. You need a guy that's more level headed. So in that regard, that is 2 checks for Dylan Strome and 1 check, I'm going to say, for Pierre-Luc Dubois. Like I say, too many penalties, 76 penalty minutes last season. You can't have your first line center sitting in the penalty box that often. That is just going to diffuse and eliminate the importance of the first line. So high upside, to be clear here, I'm trying to paint an accurate picture. High upside, big frame, elite underlying numbers, but some question marks as well. It's all about weighing out the good and the bad, right? When we talk about these players. So that's the big thing there is what you get in Pierre-Luc Dubois is that big physical presence. And I could see that, if he could really reel in his emotions and not get so invested or those sticking penalties, some of them are a bit ticky-tack. It's just that I think that Pierre-Luc Dubois is a guy that plays and he lays it all out on the line. I don't feel like 9 times out of 10 that he is a guy that mails it in. We did see glimpses of maybe 8 times out of 10, I guess I'm going to say. I think the more important thing for a coach to understand that the Kings weren't willing to understand is why is he playing disinterested? Is he not playing in a position that suits him? And, what we saw from him at the second line last season, I felt like suited him. Like I say, elevated the play around him. And in the absence of Evgeny Kuznetsov, who we know no longer plays with the Capitals, that they were looking for a really solid, stable second line center. And I do believe that they have that in Pierre-Luc Dubois. It's just, like I say, about reeling it in, playing into your strengths. And, again, the guy's got the pedigree. He's got the history. He has a long history. His father is involved in hockey. Everything is there for the makings of a perfect hockey player. I think that he still just needs to hone in on a couple things, and he could truly be some next level talent for the Capitals. All right, so coming up here after the break, the big question is, who is more qualified to play that first line center? Is it Dylan Strome or Pierre-Luc Dubois? I'll discuss straight ahead. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That is why Monarch Money is so important. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings you your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. And you can kind of drill down and take a look at your finances and see where you're spending your money wisely and maybe where you could use some more work. I realized I was spending some money on retirement. That was a good thing, but not so wisely in other regards, is spending money on sports memorabilia and going out to eat. So those are all the things that you can work on. And also, if you have a significant other in your life, you can work on your financial future together. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNHL. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. So, in the final segment of today's show, we're going to weigh in my thoughts. Who is the better option, Dylan Strome or Pierre-Luc Dubois, to play that first line center position? What do we know is last year, of course, it was Strome on the first line. Last season, it was PLD on the second line, but who is more qualified? Let's dive into that in the final segment of today's show. Let's start with Strome. He's proven. That's a big thing. He has chemistry with Ovechkin. He just had a career year, and he plays smart and doesn't take bad penalties. Hockey IQ, chemistry with Alex Ovechkin, huge, and plays smartly. The cons, not overly physical. He's not the fastest guy, and his possession numbers aren't as strong as Dubois. And, when we talk about those things, it's sometimes people put a little bit more weight into a physical player. Oftentimes, I'm guilty of doing that as well, but Dylan Strome is more of a finesse player. And there is a place for a finesse player in there. It's good to have the physical guys, to be sure, but having the finesse guys like Dylan Strome is huge as well. Talking about Pierre-Luc Dubois, pros, big, powerful, great underlying number, 62% goals for percentage, 2.42 goals per 60. He can absolutely dominate when he's engaged. The cons is his consistency is an issue. We've talked about that. He's been accused of that at all the different stops that he's made around the NHL at points in his career, that oftentimes he appears disinterested. We know he takes too many penalties, and chemistry with Ovi is still of a question mark. So those are all things to factor in. And, when I talk about these kind of things, it's not like you're taking Strome out of the equation, right? It's not like Strome is vanquished and he's no longer a part of the team. I'm just saying that is there the possibility that, they give Pierre-Luc Dubois a look on that first line? And the answer to that question, I think, is absolutely. And the perfect time to get a look at him on the first line would be in the preseason. I think that the job, of course, is Dylan Strome's. And until he does something to prove otherwise, I think he's pretty secure. I think that, when you're a player of Alex Ovechkin's ilk, that you got to think the coaches kind of they want your opinion, right? That, Alex Ovechkin probably has a pretty firm opinion about who he wants centering his line. And you got to think that Dylan Strome is a front runner. I don't think that Alex Ovechkin has any issues with Pierre-Luc Dubois, but I think the chemistry goes a long ways with him. And when you take a look at the Capitals, I think that they don't want to shake up the snow globe a whole lot. We know that there still is a tremendous amount of questions, primarily on the third line, more specifically the third line center position. It's just, I think, options for the Capitals if they run into stretches throughout the season, maybe where they're not getting the production that they're looking for. And the one thing we know about Spencer Carberry, like I've talked about in today's episode, is that he's not afraid of shaking things up. You saw a loss in the first game of the season, and right away he was shaking things up. He does not have his feet dug into, kind of old school hockey ideology where this is my lines. I'm going with a hot hand in net the whole time. And that's just the way it's going to be. Spencer Carberry doesn't work that way. It's a modern coaching system that you don't deal with the same things the way you would, like, say, with Peter Laviolette, where I think that Peter Laviolette was more of an old school coach. And you see that gets him limited production, big picture. It often doesn't get him to the goal where he's at. So I think that the Capitals with Spencer Carberry, he is a huge part of this equation. So the verdict, let's get to the verdict. If you ask me right now, it should come as no surprise. I think it still goes with Dylan Strome. He's earned that spot. And I don't think that is something that the Capitals should mess with too much. Don't try to fix something that isn't broke. Maybe you've heard that before. I think that holds true here as well. But like I say, I'm not opposed. Say Pierre-Luc Dubois came into camp on a heater, just ready to elevate his game, and we've seen that before with different players. that, it could make it interesting. And I want the most qualified person to play that first line because, like I say, at least next season is going to be quite a big responsibility. In years to come, that's going to change a lot. I spoke about why Strome works well with Ovechkin because they're not, neither one of them is the quickest skater on the ice. When you minus Ovechkin in years to come, that's going to change everything. We might see a change up the middle there a little bit. But all things considered, I think that it is Strome's job. He's earned it, and he's proven that he can do it. But like I say, if Dubois comes into camp, plays with pace, and cuts down the penalties, he's going to have a higher ceiling, and he's going to become more valuable. But when you come into camp, it's not going to be easy to determine, if he can cut down on penalties because we haven't seen him play in game time. I guess you could gauge some of that based on preseason games. But I think, like I said, it's Strome's job until he proves otherwise. So this might be one of these storylines to follow all season. Could be a battle, could be a rotation that, like I say, it's not written in stone that they can rotate through. And wouldn't that be a great option for the Capitals if they, Pierre-Luc Dubois can play really well on the first line as well. The one thing I know for certain is the Caps have two solid options, and that's not a bad problem to have. That is what you call an abundance of wealth. That regardless of where they play up the middle, the Caps are lights out. Strome, Dubois, and you're talking Nick Dowd on the fourth line and a question mark on the third line center, right? Is it McMichael or whatever the case is? There is a lot of things to consider, but like I say, it's a good situation for the Capitals to be in. Many teams don't have that luxury. They're just trying to put together a team that has maybe one good center or two at the most. I think that the Capitals have a lot of great options, and not to mention there's wingers on the team that have a history playing at the center position. So I think that Spencer Carberry has a lot of tools in his tool set. He has a lot of options on which direction that he can go in. So there's no real loser in the situation. I guess if you were Strome, I don't know if you would view that as a loss, but it's a win-win for the Capitals. Suffices to say, having a strength up the middle with Dylan Strome and Pierre-Luc Dubois, it is going to be exciting to see how this whole season unfolds. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.